Hello again, Alan Plum here with a little more from Shed Engineering and our N-gauge folding model railway. Got a little bit more of the scenery in. All this back section is now filled in. And also a little more on the right hand side of the embankment. I've also been adjusting some of the contours. As you know, this textured coating I think is too rough, so I intended going over this, but this field was a little bit too high. I wanted that to be closer to the road level, and I've graded this a little bit so that I can get a gate, so there's an entrance into the field. But what I'm going to do now is resurface this roadway. Now, I've seen people using filler and the scenic road kits to model their roads, and it seems a little bit complicated and fiddly, and to try and lay something down this hillside and under the bridge I think could be quite problematic. In one of my previous videos I show how this was laid. It's just a strip of cardboard cut to the shape of the road and laid on some expanding foam. The problem is I had just painted it and not let it fully dry, and of course, as you can see, as I was pressing it into position, it stuck to my fingers and I've torn away the top shiny surface of the cardboard. Well, when I tried repainting it, it obviously soaks in, and I wasn't completely happy with it, so it's a matter of resurfacing it. Now, I'd already experimented and thought about using sandpaper and painting it, but while I was in B&Q the other day I came across this 120 grit. I'm not particularly bothered about the texture on N-gauge. The texture has got to be very fine anyway, but it's the colour that struck me, because this is just literally a country lane going to one or two farms, and so it'd probably just be tar with small pea gravel sprinkled on top. The grey always strikes me as very difficult to actually weather. I think Simon of Simon's Shed, a great set of videos there if you want to look at them, ideal for the beginner, although he's now progressed on to motorising signals. But he had problems when he got water come through the roof of his shed in repainting his roads and getting the exact same colour. So here I've just made some templates out of paper, transferred them onto the sheets of sandpaper, got them cut out ready, and then I'm obviously just going to glue them in place. And I'm just using ordinary decorator's cork. Remember, in my case, with this being a folding model, there's going to be a certain amount of flexing and twisting, and so the more flexibility I can build in, the better. So the sandpaper is not going to crack, and there's a lot less chance that the decorator's cork will crack. If I was to use ordinary polyfiller or something like that, I can well imagine there would be cracks all over the place in no time. And this gives a certain amount of adjustment so that you can just gently press the sandpaper down into place, and you haven't got enormous amounts of glue oozing out here, there and everywhere. So you can see how simple it is. Just a matter of spreading on the decorator's cork and placing the sandpaper on top and pressing into place. Now I'm also thinking that this would be ideal for sort of gravelled areas or car parks or that kind of thing. To me it would stand up as a weathered concrete type surface. So here again, I mean this has only taken probably 15 minutes in total. Just spreading the decorator's cork onto the next section and laying it in place. Now on the joints there, just where my fingers are, I've feathered the edge. In other words, I've got it between my finger and thumb and torn tiny little pieces away. You could be better with a pair of narrow-nosed pliers and just nibble away at the edge so you don't get the straight cut edge. Now on this next section that I'm about to do, I actually forgot to do that, and I have got a straight cut edge, but it still went in alright, and it doesn't show up too bad unless your attention's drawn to it. At the top there, the road goes on to that lift out section for the tunnel. So again, that is, I'm hoping that's going to be relatively easy. If I lay the road section like this and just leave a few millimeters overhanging, then I shouldn't have a joint in the road. So there you can see it finished off. It's a little bit pristine, but I would imagine, or I'm hoping, that's going to be quite easy just to weather. This is some of the sandpaper that I tried painting, and just to give you an impression, here I've got a piece that's just painted. So possibly you could experiment with painting sandpaper a grey and possibly weathering it and gluing it in position. It might be something that people can use in certain circumstances. So what next? Well, we're back to trees. Yes, I'm still experimenting with trees. I'm not keen on the idea of spending so much money on armatures for trees and the little bags of foliage costing £2 whatever. So I drilled a piece of plywood with lots of tiny little holes. You need 2 of them ideally. I then cut lots of strips of wire. Any wire will do, long as it's sort of stiff enough to hold its shape. I threaded that between the 2 pieces of plywood. It's not necessary to have this, you could just twist it, but if you bend the ends over, that stops them coming out, and you can get a lovely tight twist on the trunk. I say you could just use pliers if you wanted, but as you can see, you get a lovely tight twist. So take one of the pieces of plywood off and then just separate. I think I've got something like 13 or 14 pieces of wire here. Separate them down so that you've gradually got sort of 3 going off in one direction, 4 in another, and twist them together, and gradually you can get the shape of a tree. I've obviously got these far too long, but trim them down, and as you can see, you soon end up with an armature. This is some scrap foam from the expanding foam when I was doing the hills, just breaking those up into tiny little pieces, and all I'm doing is pushing them down onto the branches. A little bit fiddly, but not complicated. Any shape or size or seems to work. And 5 or 6 minutes later, that's all it took really. You soon get it to build up, and you've got something pretty representative of your average deciduous tree. And there we are. Now that needs a liberal coating of PVA, but first of all we need some foliage material. Instead of buying these bags of foliage that cost so much. So here I've got some sawdust from Travis Perkins, my local builders merchants. Be very careful when you're sourcing sawdust. You want to make sure that it's got no MDF dust in it whatsoever. MDF dust has got a lot of resin in, and that's not at all good for your health. So here we're adding some ordinary emulsion paint. Give that a mix. It does take a while to actually mix. You've got to be patient to blend it in. There I've added a little bit of black to darken it down. Whack it in the microwave. Don't give it any more than 10, 12, 15 seconds. Give it a stir, back in, bring it out, give it another stir. I think it took probably 8 or 9 times before it was reasonably dry. I'm then sharing it out into some mixing beakers because I want some different colours. Again, this is just ordinary emulsion paint and poster paint that I've mixed up into different greens. So mixing that together. Again, it takes a while just to mix and get it absolutely fully incorporated and coloured all the way through nice and evenly. And then I found the best way to dry this out is to spread it out on a plate so that the moisture evaporates as quick as possible. And again, I probably put it in 5 or 6 times. Then I picked out any larger pieces and discarded them. Here's another armature that I'm just doing with the pliers. Again, starting off with 12 or 14 pieces of wire, separating them down and creating the branches. Then obviously you've got your armature and foam coated in PVA, and then it's just a matter of sprinkling the coloured sawdust on and building up the foliage effect. Here I'm just adding a few more drops of PVA and then dropping some different coloured sawdust on. This is another one with a slightly more open armature that I'm just coating in PVA, and on this one I used dried parsley. So anything that's coloured and textured seems to work fine. There again, I'm just adding a little bit more PVA so that I can get a little bit of variation in colour. Now there the PVA glue is still showing through. That dried off quite nicely, but if there is anything like that, you can soon just touch that up with a little bit of paint. I should have paid attention to the trunk. I was thinking of just a bit of PVA and wrapping some toilet tissue round, and I think that would dab in place and soon disguise the trunk. a bit of grey or brown paint, and I think that would soon be a lot more realistic than this demonstration here. You could also solder the wire together to make a tree armature. That would be good practice for soldering. Well, it's a beautiful day outside, so why don't we take a walk up the railway line and up the embankment towards Bakewell. And we shouldn't be far away from one of the train spotters' vantage points, a little bridge that crosses over to the golf course. Oh, there we are, just up front. How many young train spotters stood up there years ago, waiting for the London Manchester Express to come up the bank. So let's try making a little bridge like that. This is my first attempt at scratch building anything. I'm using artist's foam board, I think it is. It's plastic on one side and like a thick tin foil on the other. To make sure I get the right size, I've used a Pico portal, but I'm straightening off the edges because on Midland Railway the bridges had straight sides. I've cut them out, and here you can see I'm just using a scribe to incise the stonework. Then I cut 2 pieces of card just to act as supports for the deck of the bridge, and they're going to be glued in just there. Then I'm back to the sandpaper idea, and here I'm just weathering down a strip of sandpaper. Then I'm using card glue. It's very much like PVA, but within 10 or 15 seconds it goes very sticky, and it's got a real good tackiness to it, and so it's ideal for anything like this. I then glue the card down onto the sandpaper and cut the excess off. Then I thought it'd be easier to paint it before we put everything together, so here I'm just giving the impression of some grass growing down the side. I can always add scatter or something like that at a later date if I think it's necessary. So then we apply glue to the edge of the bridge deck and glue that onto one of the sides. That needs holding for half a minute or so until that just grabs hold, and I then back that up with some hot glue all the way along the seam. We then simply glue that to the other side of the bridge. And then obviously reinforce that with hot glue as well. Then for the underside of the bridge I'm using some N-scale printed brick card, and I'm cutting this on the slant or diagonally because the brickwork was normally always sort of on a spiral. Get the card curved around so it fits on the underside nicely. Then that can be tried in place to see whether it needs trimming down at all. Now in my case, because I was using this thick foam card, I then used my Dremel and a little sanding stone to create a recess so that I didn't get quite so much of the edge of the card showing around the stonework that I'd created on the face of the bridge. We then tried that in place, did a little bit of final trimming, and then that was glued in place. But in this case I used PVA glue with a little bit of black painting and some filler so that it would fill any gaps at the same time. We then cut two very thin strips of card for the edging stones on the bridge and incised them to give the stone effect, and using the card glue they were simply glued right along each edge. I gave the card a coat of PVA just to seal it before starting the painting. And there's the little access bridge for the farmer in place. Not bad for a first attempt. Pretty good. Sweet little bridge. Nice little bridge. No, it's not. It's absolute crap. It's rubbish, rubbish, rubbish. Absolute. I'm disgusted with it. Absolutely disgusted. Why? Let me tell you why. This might serve as a warning to other beginners like me. I wanted to build a little access bridge that the farmer would use just from one side of the line over to the other side of the line. Nothing complicated, but on Midland Railway the sides of bridges and tunnel portals used to be straight. This is Through Limestone Hills by Bill Hudson, a lovely book, and it gives all the architecture of the line. So you've got all the station buildings, all the track plans, and all the plans are drawn to 2mm scale. So you've got a scale drawing, and I wanted to get something, just a reasonable representation of the straight sides. And so I used a Pico there it is. I used a Pico tunnel portal to try and get the shape rather than doing a lot of measuring, and it turns out that this is actually 50mm, making that 25 foot tall. You can virtually put a house inside the tunnel. So if that's a bridge, if that's used as a bridge entrance, then it's absolutely huge. That's going to create problems because the road coming onto the bridge or off the bridge is going to have a far greater degree of slope. if you're using it as a tunnel entrance, it pushes the tunnel entrance up, so it pushes your hill up, and then if you want a road up your hill, then again it gets extremely steep. You could actually cut a third of that away and still have clearance. That's Bill Hudson's drawing, and I don't know whether you can see that. If you put that level with the track bed, then that's where it could be a good 20, almost 25 millimeters lower down, 2.5 centimeters virtually. I've already cut 5 millimeters off the bottom of this. I need to cut another 10 millimeters off to somewhere like there for that to be roughly the same scale. So we may as well start again. Bridge for sale, one careful owner. Hope you found something of interest. Many thanks to all the subscribers, and thank you for watching.